College is a wild ride for young adults, and their mental health often suffers. This podcast addresses the inner battles many college students struggle with. You're listening to Normalize It Forward, where we have raw, unfiltered conversations about young people's biggest mental health problems, how to handle them, and how to achieve a more resilient mind. Time to get rid of those heavy burdens and focus more on self-love and care. Here is your host, Mark Lehman.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Normalize It Forward, the podcast that openly talks about mental health and wellness. Today, we are here with Dave Briggs. Dave, thank you for joining us. Dave is a longtime national broadcaster, having anchored at major networks, including Fox News, CNN, NBC Sports, and Yahoo Sports. He has also played a news anchor on season 4 of HBO's Succession. He's currently anchoring for Cheddar Business News at NYSE and creating content wherever he can all around Connecticut. Dave, welcome.
Good to see you, my friend. It's a pleasure being here. Yeah, I often joke that I ran out of real network, so I started working at a fake one, ATN, on Succession. But I think about every network I've worked at in some capacity.
Well, I've seen lots of your work over time and certainly admire it for a number of reasons. You're on the other end of the mic today, but we'll be talking about one of my favorite topics, mental health and wellness. And as you know, I'm a family therapist and work with young adults that head off to college. And these days, the support that's needed in young adults' lives to manage their own mental health and wellness is immense. We're living through a pretty difficult time, I think, for many. And all the more reason we, have these conversations and try to continue to have these conversations to role model for our youth. So let me kick things off and ask, self-care is one of those topics. It's a really big topic within wellness that a lot of people talk about. And I'm curious your thoughts on what does self-care mean to Dave?
Well, it's taken me about 47 years to begin to figure that out, and I'm still definitely not there. I had always employed, I suppose, various elements of self-care, but never figured out that I need all of the above and then some. I've always exercised, and I thought that would be enough. And then I think a couple of years ago, I added meditation. I've added journaling, counseling, therapy is a part of that journey. So what I've realized is, frankly, for me, if I'm not doing all of the above, at least 3 out of 4 or 5, I struggle. In particular, I think meditation and exercise. If I don't do one of those things, I'm completely out of balance with my mental health. Certainly therapy helps and journaling helps, and those other things are kind of complementary. But if I'm not doing at least 2+ of those things, everything's just a mess. But, I'm learning a lot all the time about my mental health journey, because I wish I'd have understood what I had 20 years ago was anxiety. I wish I would have understood 20 years ago that I was prone to depression. But thankfully, my realization of those things early has helped me identify them in one of my kids. And honestly, in having those discussions, that child has actually helped me better understand some things about mental health, has taught me things that I didn't know. So it's been quite a journey, and one that honestly evolves every day. I mean, sometimes you just fall apart.
Well, listen, our kids are our best teachers, right? And I think life is clearly a journey, and we're learning all the time. I'm glad you brought up youth, young people, because I think, as you mentioned, for a lot of young people in high school and college, they sort of feel like they got it down. You know what I mean? Like they're getting okay rest. They're getting, some exercise here and there. But they're not really forced to lean on self-care, quite the way maybe adults actually are to manage things. And sometimes for the first time, it's in college for kids where they feel, wow, my stress level is really overwhelming and something just isn't right here. And so, to your point, Dave, they have to find their own space, and for some people, they love yoga and some people love meditation. some people love car rides, some people love therapy, some people love journaling, and the list goes on. But there's so many different ways to kind of take care. And I just learned over time as a therapist and as an individual, you have to kind of pick some, you know what I mean? Like you can't just like, they won't just show up at your door. You have to kind of go get them and figure out what you like and what works best for you, you know, on your journey. So yeah, self-care is an interesting topic. I find that just the conversation around wellness can be uncomfortable for some. Mental health to me, the more I talk to people, the more I realize, everybody is susceptible. Everybody's dealing with things at varying levels. And some people are more open to it than others. I guess I'm curious, what's been your experience, Dave, as you've been out and about with people in the public?
Honestly, I'm surprised at how innate these things are or are not. I can see that, and again, I pretty much see everything through the perspective of being a parent, and that's why I appreciate what you do and how you do it. But for example, my eldest child, my 18-year-old daughter, it's innate in her to have anxiety and to have a bit of depression. And unfortunately, it is exactly like her dad. Whereas my son, who is 16, is exactly like his mom and will never, I can say right now, will not know anxiety and depression and these things. And I'm just astonished at how those things, you have so little control over them. And that's taken me a long time to realize that a lot of these problems are innate in us, or they're not. And I mean, my wife is the first one to admit it took her a long time to understand what I was going through, because she always just wakes up and is happy. I mean, so it's hard for someone like that to understand someone like me who tends to wake up blue, who tends to see the dark side or focus on negative, and it takes a lot of work to get to where she wakes up every day. So that has been an interesting part of my mental health journey, and certainly as a couple, realizing that we literally wake up in different worlds. I mean, that's really amazing to me to see, and it's been difficult, but I suppose it's helped me deal with a lot of other people. Now, what I have noticed in recent years is that men talking about mental health has literally come 180 degrees in the last couple of years. And that I am grateful for, because I remember the day that I came out, if you will, on Instagram, and that I was depressed. And it was like, oh my God, people couldn't believe it. A man was like crying on Instagram and admitting it. And now I feel like, because of, to me, I think a lot of mainstream television shows and athletes have really normalized men dealing with mental health issues. And those two things, I think, have been instrumental. I don't know if you watched Ted Lasso.
Yeah,
that show dealt with mental health head on with the signature main character, Coach Lasso, and Suits, which was on USA, one of the longest surviving shows in the last 25 years. The main character, Harvey, dealt with mental health and straight on had panic attacks. He was like the bastion of manlyhood. So it's really a good time, I think, that mainstream media and our role models and athletes are beginning to normalize these conversations.
Wow, I can't agree with you more. I think it's so funny in some ways how it's taken us as men longer, right, to be able to get to that place. But I'm glad we have in many cases, because as human beings, we're all susceptible, right? And so, as you were talking earlier, I mean, some people are built in a way where kind of like allergies or anything else, like we're built in a way where we are more prone to depression, we are more prone to anxiety. And for those people to have to hide that, for those people to have to pretend on a day in and day out basis, only makes their scenario 10 times worse. So I'm super thankful for people like you, Dave, because I feel like, when you have made more public conversation around things like mental health, that is something that has ripple effects, because let's face it, social media gets seen by lots of people, right? And I think that kid sitting in their dorm room at 19 years old, feeling like they're the only one on a college campus who's depressed and overwhelmed, sees some of that and, is able to recognize, hey, look, there are things that can be done, which to me, I constantly find myself saying, you're never alone. There are people around, there are people that, will contact you, will hound you, will, be on you. And because they want to help, there are plenty of people out there that want to help. I'm curious because a lot of people talk about things like social media and things like COVID as just game changers for mental health. And I guess I'm curious to ask you, how do you feel like mental health, the subject mental health and wellness has changed since COVID?
Well, I think the subject has come miles and miles in terms of being a mainstream discussion. I mean, the reason I'm wearing this t-shirt, which
Love it.
if
Love
people
it.
can see, this is anger, the emotion from Inside Out. I just came from the movie Inside
Nice.
Out 2, which is the #1 movie in America, which is all about our mental health and handling anxiety and joy and sadness and embarrassment and envy and boredom. And I think that movie alone will change this conversation because it puts it in the mainstream. Families are seeing this movie together. Millions of people are seeing this movie and probably having mental health discussions before or after the film. So I think that is really, really helpful. But you asked about COVID, and I think COVID was devastating for our mental health. Myself, that seemed to be the root of my real mental health struggles. Now, part of that was losing a job in COVID, but it was that being home and feeling depressed and being stuck that started this in me. And I've seen it in kids all over town, in particular here in Westport, Connecticut. I think COVID spiked mental health issues around the country. And in towns like this, it cut back on socialization, on development. It added screens to our lives. I think it increased the amount of time we all spend on screens and on social media. So on one hand, we're in a much better place because mainstream conversations like Inside Out, like these television shows I mentioned. But on the other hand, I know that prescriptions for mental health medication have spiked. And on one hand, you might say that's great because we're treating it. No, I actually think that's a result of our mental health being in a much worse place than it was prior to COVID. And that is really sad because I think we're really short on competent mental health, counselors and therapists and psychologists and therapists like yourself. I think we're desperately short. And so things like BetterHelp are helping, but I just don't think we have nearly enough infrastructure to handle the mental health crisis that's going on that the Surgeon General talks about often.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I mean, having talked to many college campuses in the last year, and posed the concept of, hey, we need to kind of change the way we look at this. It's not just brick and mortar counseling centers that can be helpful to kids. You've got lots of adults on lots of campuses that can just lend an ear, that can just simply be a mentor, that can be a guide, that can listen. And you see these sort of things popping up that colleges are reaching for nowadays because they are so desperate. They've got so many kids walking around nowadays with their struggles. And the word that no one really wants to talk about, suicide, right? The suicide rate is way higher than most people realize. In the last 10 years, it's climbed to, the second spot for young people in terms of cause of death. And nobody wants to talk about it because it's an ugly word and it's a horrible concept and just an awful thing. But it is a reality that is connected to this conversation of mental health and wellness that it to me is significant. And, things like, this movie you were referencing to me is fantastic because it brings conversation around the basis of our emotions, things that people don't want to talk about, but need to, right? And so, it's okay to feel this way and it's okay to feel that way because we're all human beings. So we could either ignore it and not talk about it, or we could try to address it. But I agree, Dave. I think that, post-COVID, I feel like those numbers have all kind of shot up in the wrong way in some cases. And it really puts some pressure on places like colleges and universities, and even counseling centers themselves around the country to think about, are there ways we can do this differently so that we can help the general public better? Because there are so many more individuals struggling and not enough providers.
Yeah, and as someone who just recently did the college visit tour with my daughter, who's going to University of Chicago next year, I can think of, we probably went to a dozen schools. We visited more than most, but
Mhm.
that gives you a good sample size for my next point, which is I can only remember one that really emphasized mental health and mental health professionals and talking about it and mental health breaks in a building they had, and that was Yale. And so kudos to Yale. I know a lot of people have issues with how they've handled things in the last 6 months to a year regarding other issues, but I will say they really wear it on their sleeve, how they encounter mental health struggles head on. They provide counseling, they provide help, they provide break space. But on the downside, that was the only school that I remember, and these are high pressure schools that my daughter's going into, like Chicago, and we went to Duke, and we went to North Carolina, and we went to Harvard and MIT, and that was the only one that really seemed to understand the mental health crisis that these types of high performing students are undergoing right now. So it's a little scary that more schools aren't doing more.
Yeah, that's significant, Dave. I mean, I think that just for my listeners' sake, I think that, recognizing that that isn't more part of the tour, right? Because as a parent, lots of parents aren't thinking about that. They're thinking about, how do I design their dorm room, and what majors do they want, and do they have access to a city, and what computer do I buy them, and all that stuff, which is all important as well. But when your child gets to school, and if they have struggles and you haven't investigated that as an option for them, they're really going to be stuck behind the eight ball. So, I think parents really want to be thinking about that, because, as the numbers dictate, the statistics show us, there are lots of kids out there on college campuses with struggles. So, Dave, I'm curious, if you're talking directly to a young person in college who's starting to have symptoms of either depression or anxiety, what advice would you offer them?
Well, I think a lot of them, first off, need to prepare for it well before that. Now, even if they're happy, even if they've never dealt with it. So I guess my advice would precede that,
Yeah.
because a lot of kids come from towns like this one where it is a wonderful place to grow up. And I'm thrilled that my kids got to grow up here. On the other hand, kids that did grow up here didn't go through a lot of adversity, because it is a wonderful upbringing in towns like Darien or Westport or Greenwich, Weston Wilton, you name it. But they're going to deal with a lot of adversity that they've never seen, that they've never dealt with. They're going to get, God forbid, a B- or a C on a report card. They're going to deal with, terrible social situations, not getting in the sorority they want to, not getting in the fraternity they want to. So I know that's not likely that students catch this message before they deal with anxiety or depression, but I hope they're prepared for those moments and knowing that there are people to talk to. So I would just say bring a toolbox to college, which is someone you can talk to, ideally a best friend, if not a therapist. Learn how to meditate now, because that will help you deal with stress. Find a workout strategy and exercise that, and that doesn't have to be going to the gym. I will say, I have a daughter who had never been to the gym before in her life until she joined 2 weeks ago, and now has been every day since, because she suddenly realized, wow, this is the best outlet for my stress and anxiety. But it doesn't have to be the treadmill or weights. It might be going to Lake Mohegan and taking a walk because you hear the river and you smell the trees and you hear the birds and you see dogs. But find what works for you now so you know how to handle it then, and just things that clear your mind. Again, that's going to be something different for everyone. It might be meditation, it might be taking a walk, it might be going to the gym. And let's hope that don't make having a drink part of that routine. Look, I'm guilty as charged, but don't think mom and dad are a great example that they come home from work and eat a cocktail, because that would be the worst road to go down as an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah, yeah, and let's face it, there are easy options. Kids find pot, kids find drinks, kids find this, kids find that. But to your point, it's not going to resolve anything. It's a temporary solution to a much larger issue. And so I appreciate your suggestions. I think you offer some really good insight for young people to hear about, Dave. And I think that, the takeaway in many cases is finding something that matches you, finding something that works for you. And if you haven't found it with your first choice, or your second or your third, keep looking, because there are options out there that will help. And I always use the word willing. You have to be willing to try things, and maybe leave your comfort zone to do it, because you never know what club, what activity, what thing you try that exists, as corny as it may sound. Go try it and see how it feels. Because if it feels good, keep doing it. It's good for your mental health and your well-being. I'm curious to ask you about one other topic, Dave. Social media, big topic. Certainly, I think for young people and older people, it has its benefits, clearly has its drawbacks. I guess I'm wondering your thoughts on that as associated with wellness.
Well, I think with the Surgeon General, the U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, said recently that it should come with a warning label. I strongly support that mission. I fear that it might not make as big a difference as we hope, but at the very least, it might make parents open their eyes. I see there's a growing movement to ban phones in schools, which I think is a tremendous idea. New York and Los Angeles are going down that direction. There's a movement for parents to keep kids off of social media and off of smartphones until I think 13, which I also strongly support. This comes from someone who spends 10 plus hours a day on their phone and has 3 kids that are on their phones all the time, and has a 12-year-old who's been on social media for a couple of years. So pot calling that kettle black, I understand that. Genie's out of the bottle. I think we can get it back in. I think social media is extraordinarily harmful to our kids. And as a parent, again, I can say this, having seen it firsthand, it is much more serious a deal for daughters than it is for sons. And parents, you should know that. I am not being sexist. I have 2 daughters and I have 1 son, and the pressure on young girls is 20x what it is these young men. Just go look what the boys can wear to school. Sweatpants and gross t-shirts, and these kids don't even comb their hair, the boys. Right. And the girls are under so much pressure to be thin and to look cute and to have those pictures match on Instagram. As long as you can keep your kids off of social media, please do it. And you have to do this together. You have to talk to 4, 5, 6 parents, the parents of your daughters or sons' friends. That's the only way to do it, because you cannot keep your kid off social media if they're the only one. Don't do that to them. That's not fair. I probably shouldn't elaborate, but I do have a kid who I believe Instagram caused an eating disorder, was the leading factor. And this cost parents their lives. Now, I'm thankful it didn't us. This gets me a little emotional, Mark. We were on it, and we were determined to stamp this out and get counseling every day and talk to her. We never ignored this for 1 second. I quit a job that I was doing in another state because I knew we needed to be here and focus on this every minute of every day. But I don't think parents have any idea how much harm it's causing.
Yeah, it's destructive, Dave. And I think you hit on 2 really important pieces. The body image piece for females is immense. And really, as you're talking, I'm thinking this is a formula for anxiety, right? For kids, like it just churns anxiety and makes kids feel less valued, which is just crazy. It's just crazy that it's kind of come to this. But I think your message is really important. I'm hoping my listeners hear it and really think about it, because Dave, you hit on such an important topic. To really band together with friends' parents, right? Because if you do this with just your kid, you're just going to constantly hear about all of the other friends that they're around and their availability to social media. So be wise, be smart. I think times are changing for us as parents and for kids, and we just have to kind of stay up to date with that stuff and do what we can to protect, our young ones.
And I will add that I know you don't want to snoop, but believe me, you better snoop. I wish I had. You have to follow them, and that's part of the contract. If they don't let you follow them, they're not on it, because you need to be looking in these comments. We were a little late in that regard, but I've talked to a lot of parents who have done that since, learning from us and seen some of it before it became a problem. Read those comments, see who's following them and who they're following. It's just part of the contract. Like, I don't love that we're on Life 360 and find my iPhone. We see where our kids are going every minute. But again, part of the contract. We can't put that genie back in the bottle. You got to snoop around a little bit. And I will say, like, if anyone wants to talk to me about any of these things, I'm an open book. I will answer every DM on Instagram. That's the best place to get me. But I'm happy to talk to anyone about mental health or our kids or pressures. I'm here.
I really appreciate it, Dave. I know you're a busy guy. I so appreciate your honesty around this topic, because it's, especially for men, this is a really hard thing to talk about. And especially when it hits our kids, we're protective of our kids and we want our kids to be happy. That's all we want them to be happy and safe. And there's things we need to be doing, right? As parents and as individuals. Really, the reason I created Normalize It Forward is I want there to be more conversation around these hard topics. Mental health is not easy to talk about. Wellness, not easy to talk about, but it really does help when we try to have conversation and kids hear us talking about it. Kids hear us and recognize, hey, these parents understand that this is really impacting us. And this is really big in our community amongst young adults. So again, I appreciate your time and your energy around this, Dave. The other thing that I've been doing, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I've been asking people to nominate someone, a friend, a coworker, or a relative that you think it would be helpful for me to interview in this particular area around mental health and wellness to continue and keep the conversation moving forward. Any thoughts, any ideas as to?
Yeah, I'll put her on the spot because she is one of my favorite human beings and in this space, and has been a therapist at times for me and her. She's an actress, Stephanie Shostak, who is probably very busy and tough to pin down, but I will help you apply pressure to my friend Steph.
Awesome.
Because her voice in this mental health conversation has been extraordinary.
Fantastic. That is just the right person to nominate and keep this conversation going, Dave. So again, I appreciate your time and energy. Thank you so much. Have yourself a wonderful rest of the evening.
You're the best, man. Thank you.
Take care. Bye, Dave.
That's all for this episode of Normalize It Forward. May this conversation serve as a reminder that you are never alone in facing your mental health struggles. There are always people who can help. To dive even deeper into our journey of normalizing one of the biggest issues young people face, check out more episodes of the show at youareheard.com. It's UAREHEARD.com. Continue gaining access to the right tools, the best resources, and the most insightful advice to achieve positivity, mindfulness, and genuine happiness.